Hello, my name is Jezreel Bohlander, and today I'm going to share with you my digital story. For my digital story, I decided to focus on my high school experience between the years of 2007 to 2011. I was in a rural combination junior and senior high school with the same four core teachers that taught all 4 years. This was a norm-based learning institution molded by state standards, emerging Common Core, and basic teaching experiences that were based off of how my teachers were taught when they were in school. Teachers did not change their instructional methods the entire time I was in school and stuck to a strict script that consisted of students being silent, passive participants unless called on by teachers to respond, rote memorization, note taking, and worksheet practice before taking cumulative standard assessments at the end of our units. The goal of our education seemed to be complacency and learning enough to enter college or entry level jobs before knowledge fell victim to the mundanity of everyday life. We had mostly white staff. I remember only one paraprofessional and the cafeteria staff who were Hispanic. All of the other instructional staff were white, and all of the administration were also white. Thinking back, I remembered mostly white rural students as well. However, I'm not sure if this is a narrative I've constructed myself and why I might have constructed it. When reviewing my high school yearbook, I discovered that it was ultimately about a 60-40 mix of Hispanic and white students. Did I create this narrative of monoculturalism to serve my idea of a conservative childhood? Or were these students asked to assimilate to white ideals in order to benefit from the education system they were in? Even scarier, had our school adopted a colorblind mentality that perpetuated social injustices by not acknowledging the fact that these injustices existed in the first place, or that other races had differing cultural backgrounds and experiences? Did this mentality trick my memory into reflecting on an all but monocultural remembrance of this time in my life? And this leads me to question ultimately if I'm part of the problem. Regardless of race, the goal of our education within this small school seemed to be complacency. It was very clear that we needed to learn how to be complacent and listen to authority in order to be successful in school and in life. This outdated method served few and perpetuated societal norms and thus inequality. We were stuck in the ages of weaker, feeble-minded females and generational families who held all of the influence and affluence. So female students and those who belonged to the affluent families received a bit of an easier time in school. There was also a general lean towards Christian conservative values. This education did not match the cultural ideals and values of the Hispanic students who attended the school, and those students were often checked out because they were not represented, engaged by, or able to relate to the curricular content that they were being taught. On a personal note, I was a good student. Good students were those who got good grades, paid attention, and were able to participate and contribute when asked. I was a great student, actually. Some of the classes that were my favorite consisted of taking down handwritten notes that our science teacher had scrawled across blackboards that went around the perimeter of the room. We would spend a day or two writing in silence, word for word, his notes, and then we would review them with him. Then at the end of the unit, we would take a test that consisted of fill in the blank, true or false, or multiple choice. I was good at this type of learning. However, I have realized as an adult that I was not genuinely learning. Rather, the rote memorization would stay with me for a short period of time and then I would lose it. I have retained very little knowledge from my high school days, but despite graduating in the top 5 of my class. And many of my classroom peers feel the same. The rigid script-like education did not work for everyone. There were many students who barely passed despite their efforts, and even more who had no desire to participate in class at all because they were not engaged, represented, or able to relate with the curriculum or the staff. There was one student in particular that I remember this learning and teaching style really did not serve well. As a result, he had been held back several times and checked out of his education long before reaching high school. Our senior year, he would get away with anything, sleeping in class, being disruptive, and the teachers just passed him to get him out of the school. He turned 20 about 2 weeks after we graduated. Society at the time was changing, but we weren't experiencing any of these changes in our little town. Outside of our town, reforms like the No New Youth Jail movement in 2010 sought to fight injustice by opposing construction of a new youth jail in Seattle. In 2008, we faced a massive financial crisis that blundered the economy, but our town remained unchanged. Occupy Wall Street occurred in 2011 as the start to the anti capitalist movement, begging for accountability for the downfall in 2008 and aimed at reducing or ending wealth inequality. This is where we get common phrases that still exist today, such as eat the rich and denoting the elite as the 1%. During this time, we also elected our first Black president in 2008 with a campaign slogan that sought solidarity and optimism. Yes, we can. During this time, LGBTQIA rights were also on the front and center, as a significant focus for the time was put on discriminatory legislation against this community of people. We saw changes in policies like the Equality Act of 2007 and the added protection of gender reassignment to the act in 2010. We were on the verge of many upcoming social movements, including Black Lives Matter, marijuana decriminalization, and even gun control movements were on the horizon. During this time, educational reforms were coming out of No Child Left Behind and moving into a time of race to the top. While the federal implementation of these educational reforms came from a place of good intent, there were hidden consequences surrounding them. In theory, it was a way to boost education by competing to improve test scores and being rewarded for doing so. However, this would turn out to be just a band-aid on a festering wound, as more money was given to schools who had resources to do well without addressing the schools who continued to flounder and what they were missing. The voucher system was also an attempt at allowing students to break the cycle and move into new schools if they were located in areas of poverty or low test scores. This too came with unintended consequences, which dismantled public school funding to an extent that poor schools were likely to become even poorer, allowing the cycle to be fed by the very system that sought to dismantle it. Sheltered in our small rural town, my community and school was all but ignorant to these changes happening around us. As conservative news stations and what the pastor told us on Sundays were the only insight we really had to the outside world. Outside of this bubble of ignorance, the world was on a precipice of some real societal change between the years of 2007 and 2011. But with all this change waging around us, our school was very set on maintaining the status quo and resisting change. The students from wealthy and affluent families were still from those wealthy and affluent families, and there were still standards to uphold. Our community and our school district remained conservative, Republican, and we liked it that way. Stagnant, no change. I am my mother's daughter. I'm an anxious overthinker, and I watched my mother be that all those years ago. I'm a burnt out, formerly gifted student who has always struggled with saying no. I would like to say that I'm a reformed people pleaser, but I still struggle with it constantly. I've always been a social chameleon, adapting to what everyone else needs me to be as a defense mechanism, warding off criticism or confrontation. I have always assimilated into what other people, what society, want me to be. This was no different when you considered my academic pathway. My value was in what my teachers and my mother thought of me. Therefore, I would do whatever was necessary to make them proud of me, who I was, and what I had done. It is part of myself that I must actively fight against if I want to be an advocate for change in my future position as an educator. The question of what aspects of my identity were affirmed through the educational process and what was denigrated is a difficult one for me to answer, because I've lived my entire existence on the premise that I am nothing until I am acknowledged. Therefore, my identity lies in what other people see in me and not my own personal beliefs about who I am. However, through this reflection, I can realize that my time in school affirmed my identity as a smart young woman, a good student, but purely because of the effort I put forward to ensure that this is what people saw. As I continue to reflect on who I am and my continued education, I'm affirmed in my identity as an Anglo-Saxon majority member who grew up in such a way that I valued conservative and monocultural influences while simultaneously touting that I was colorblind as a way to continue to avoid social injustices in the outdated way of life that I was living and still remain morally superior ultimately. As an adult, however, I no longer feel that this is part of my identity. My academic and educational experiences have reaffirmed that I am a socially anxious person who struggles to interact in socially acceptable manners. And I often do not value things within the normative sector of society. Thus, I am faced with the realization that I am a creative follower, masquerading as a good leader only through my persistence and perseverance and hard work. However, it's time to move forward. Reflecting on this, I think if it were me, if I had been the one making the educational decisions within my high school, my experience and the experience of those around me would have been very different. I would challenge teachers to take educational risks, think of creative ways to bring in more culturally diverse experiences so that the students within the community were prepared for life in a diverse world. Borrowing from the advice of Dewey, I would ask teachers to practice experiential teaching, giving the students the ability to learn outside the classroom walls and really interact with their society and surrounding for organic and authentic learning. I would encourage teachers to place just as high a value on student engagement with the understanding that test scores are directly linked to students' ability to engage with, and relate to the curriculum. As I look back on my educational experience, I find that it was highly skewed towards benefiting those who fit the norm and was less of a benefit to those who were outside this tidy small box. While students received all the same educational opportunities, there were many students for whom this equality was confused with equity, and their inability to relate to the material or see themselves represented within their educational experience impeded their ability to fully engage with and internalize the information they were being taught. I would encourage hiring practices that were social justice focused while also pushing for a conscious view of the curriculum being used to ensure that diversity was present within both. Our education did very little to prepare us for a life in a diverse society. We had minimal cultural exposure and minimal exposure to diverse views, causing many of the students who attended college outside of our little town to drop out and seek jobs closer to home. This is especially true of students who did not have strong familial support in going to college, either due to their cultural differences or lack of economic support. This is not to say that my classmates did not experience success. Many of my classmates went on to live extremely successful lives. All of my former classmates have talked about how happy they are with their lot in life. Our schooling did install in us that we had to work hard to succeed, and that worked for many of us to obtain success later on. However, I feel if our teachers had made our high school experience more engaging, more active, and more applicable to our lived experiences and lives outside of the school walls, it would have inspired many more students to attend college and maybe reach levels of success that they cannot even fathom right now. I think a stronger focus on the social justice lens and preparing these students for the hurdles that they would have had to overcome rather than shielding them from reality and claiming colorblindness would have changed a lot for these students. This brings me to a place of reflecting on my own social justice outlook, realizing that equality does not equal equity, and just because students have the same educational opportunities does not mean they have access to the same educational experience. As I reflect on my learning of court cases such as Lau v. Nichols, the students have the right to an education that is meaningful to them, which leads me to wonder how meaningful is students' education if they struggle to relate, internalize, connect, and even understand the curriculum they are being taught. As an aspiring teacher, this propels me forward with a passion to do better, a passion to ensure that all students get more out of their education than my classmates, and even I did. I would like to think that this vision can be realized with additional resources, vetting educational materials for representation of diversity, ensuring students know how they are valued through building relationships, crafting a classroom culture of mutual respect, and also representing students with the hard realities and how to prevail when faced with them. My educational experience was in stark contrast to what Bohlander suggests. My educational experience did not give one the ability to formulate opinions and make decisions for oneself. Instead, it was more akin to Freire's suggestion that knowledge was seen as a gift from those who consider themselves knowledgeable, bestowed onto those they consider to know nothing. As students, we knew nothing, and we should sit down and be quiet and respectful so this gift could be given to us. It would have done these teachers and administrators good to consider students not just as receptacles to be filled, but rather a kindling that needed to be ignited with an unquenchable hunger for knowledge that and the critical thinking skills to necessitate and perpetuate societal change and lifelong learning. As I reflect on my educational philosophy, I keep coming back to the idea that value and respect for diversity and opportunity for all are how we reach the dream of equity. I strive to have every student who leaves my classroom walls endowed with a passion for learning and a thirst for knowledge that they cannot satisfy. Teaching students to question the narrative they have been taught and really examine and think critically about the issues we are facing today. I seek, like many great educators, to use my knowledge to empower my students with the skills and ability to influence real change. Hooks reminds us that the love of justice cannot be sustained if it's only a manipulation to be with the in crowd. Because of this, I must actively fight against my need to be accepted and be socially acceptable if I am to serve my future students in the way they deserve. If I am silent, I am complacent in a system that enforces a social hierarchy. Therefore, I must continue to reflect on my experiences and practice in order to actively avoid being part of the problem. With that understanding in mind, I will leave you with my future pledge. I vow to create a classroom that values diversity, equity, and lifelong learning. I vow to prepare students for life outside the classroom, the hurdles they will have to overcome, the biases and stigmas they will have to fight against. I vow to the best of my ability to teach students how to come out of these struggles on top and become respectful, knowledgeable, active citizens who actively fight for social change. Above all, I vow to ensure that my classroom is a place where all students feel safe and know that their voice matters. Thank you.